Hey everybody, Ben here from DMC Films and Cinemablocks Studios, and today we're going to be making paint out of chalk pastels. So recently I was watching some videos over on YouTube specifically about drawing with soft chalk pastels. And while I do know a good bit about this medium, there was something about when it was said that, all pastels really are just compressed pigment and then maybe a little bit of binder. Which I know this, and it's just something I know, but when I heard it said, I thought, wait a minute. If it is just compressed powdered pigment, maybe I can make it a powder again. And if I can do that, maybe I can just mix it right into some paint. So a couple weeks ago, this is exactly what I did, and I made this is a really nasty store fuchsia color. Would never use this in out of my regular pastel set. But I decided, let's give this a try, and it worked, somewhat. The one difference between paint that you're going to basically make yourself out of pastels and stuff you buy in the tubes is you're never going to be able to get the pigment particles soft enough and small enough that it's actually going to make a smooth paint. But this kind of thing could be really interesting for a mixed media project. So I'm going to show you how to make paint with just some chalk pastels and some acrylic molding paste. Okay, so to start out, you're going to want some sort of a chalk pastel. I recommend using something cheap. Now, I've recently been working my way up to some Rembrandt pastels. I've been buying individual sticks for about a year and a half now. So I have my old low Cornell pastels, which are decent, but when you compare them to a higher quality brand, they're just not as good. So I just have all these pastels that are probably going to sit forever. So I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do with these? Because I'm certainly not going to, use them up. So I got to find another use. So I thought, okay, let's try and make some paint. So I'm going to pick a color here today. I'm going to go with sort of this greenish blue color. And we're going to start grinding this up. Okay, so I'm obviously not going to use this entire pastel. I'm do a little bit at a time. I just want to break a piece of this off. And the easiest way to do that, rather than just snapping it and having it go everywhere, I'm going to kind of score the edges with a knife. And take a little more. I'm going to lose a little bit on the table, but not a big deal. So in doing this, when I snap it, it comes apart a little cleaner. Doesn't go crazy with breaking. So you're going to want something to actually kind of crush this up with. You can probably do it with a spoon and maybe like a pudding cup, but if you happen to have a mortar and pestle around, I highly suggest using it. Just make sure you wash it. A lot of times they're used in kitchens to grind spices and pepper. You don't want to contaminate your food with your art supplies or vice versa. So at this point you just kind of grind it up. Now, one thing to note, just in doing this, you're not going to get it super fine. Like I said before, you're not a paint factory. You're not going to be able to grind the pigment fine enough in order to make the paint, super smooth. But in general, you just kind of want to just do it by how it feels. When you feel like you kind of ground it up enough, just go ahead and stop. Like so, and all of a sudden we just have a bunch of pigment powder. Next up, of course, you're going to want some kind of a palette. I recommend using something relatively hard. I'm going to use my regular glass palettes. I would avoid using anything like a paper plate for this type of mixing, because you're going to need an extra bit of, I guess you could say, impact to make sure you're really getting a good mix. So in that case, I recommend a good hard surface. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab a mixing knife in this case, just a regular painting knife, and just basically emptying that powder out onto your palette. You might have to kind of scrape the edges of your mixing container, so it may not all come out. If you grinded it to the edges, And just get out as much as you can. I could probably hit this with a brush, but I'm not really worried about it today. And just like that, you have a little pile of powdered pigment. So from here, you could actually mix in any medium. Really, you could probably use linseed oil and make an oil paint. If you have some gum arabic or watercolor medium, you can probably make watercolors out of it. But I'm an acrylic painter, so we're going to make acrylic paint. So this is some regular molding paste. It's a little thick because I've had it for a while. I don't use it as much as I used to. And one thing with mixing this paint up, you want to make sure not to add too much of whatever medium you're using at once. You want to start as dry as possible and slowly build up the wetness of it. And it's not going to mix immediately. It's going to be a lot longer of a process. It's going to be like here. You're going to look like you're making cookies or something like that. It's basically a cookie dough consistency. And we will be adding a little bit of water as we go, and a little bit of some other mediums, just to kind of get the consistency I feel we kind of need. Now, one thing to note about molding paste is because they use marble dust in it, it's going to be a little bit. It's going to act a little bit of a white, act like a white a little bit. So you want to be sure you're not adding so much that it's going to completely change the color. But I will get a little bit more here. And in using molding paste in this case, it's going to basically create something similar to a heavy body paint. I'm going to get a little water, just kind of dip my knife in my water bucket. I'll just start pushing it all together. And again, you're not going to have super smooth paint. It's going to be a little bit gritty and a little bit thick in general. Granted, yeah, you can thin it out, but for the most part, you're going to be looking at a relatively thick mix. Now, one thing I added to my initial batch to this was a little bit of acrylic glazing liquid. You could probably get away with using like a matte gel or a soft gel, but the liquid in this case is going to be sort of similar to water in that it's going to emulsify the paint as well as thin it out enough to make it workable. And you can see it's starting to come together a little bit. And again, because we used the molding paste, it's going to be a little bit lighter than our initial mix in color. It also has to do with making that dry pigment wet. But in general, that because we mixed in to something that was a little bit white, it did pass down the color a little bit in that way. That's pretty close. Just gonna add a little more water. And again, I recommend doing this with cheap pastels because you don't want to waste your good ones on something like this. But I do find it's definitely an interesting mix. Get a little more of the glaze. That's probably all we're going to need then. And right about like that, we just made paint with a chalk pastel. And because again we used acrylic mediums to create this, it is in every respect acrylic paint. We just basically created a pigmented color with it. So just like I did on my test board, you can apply it with a knife, or you can apply it with a brush. Or you can mix it with any pre-existing paint you already have. And this actually helps even out the consistency a little bit as well. So it may not be, straight out of the tube color, but it's certainly straight on the palette color, that's for sure. So this may not be the best idea for everybody, but it's definitely a fun little experimental project and definitely something worth trying for your next mixed media piece. Remember that while making this sort of pastel type paint is pretty interesting, pretty easy, you're never going to get a super fine grind to your pigment, despite how dry and powdery it looks in that initial grind. When you start mixing it in with paint, you're going to start to notice those impurities and imperfections and the fact that those pigment particles are just still very big. That said, however, if you're looking for an interesting sort of thick application, definitely give this technique a try. And as always, for more tips, tutorials, and other art videos, subscribe to the channel. This has been from DMC Films and Cinderblock Studios. See you guys next time.